Want to continue looking at characteristics, specifically average rate of change, which is the same as the slope in linear equations. So for that, I'm going to go look at the formula sheet, and I'm looking for average rate of change, which I see right here. I'm just going to read it out to you. It says the average rate of change is the change in the y value divided by the change in the x value for 2 points. Okay, what does that sound like? That sounds just like slope, which is right here. The change in the y value, change represented by subtraction, divided by the change in the x value, but for 2 specific points. Okay, so that's going to be the key thing to know when you're doing this. So I'm going to do, as always, I'm going to do my question, which is on the top of the next page, and it looks like mine is from an equation. And then you're going to do your question, and yours is at the bottom of this page, and yours is a graph. So technically, I am doing it from an equation and from a graph, because there's only one additional step in average rate of change from an equation and a graph. All right, so here are the official way of doing it, but I'm just going to show you the shortcut. But if you prefer the official way, by all means, go ahead. All right, so I'm going to go to my question. So for my question, remember we said the hint was that you always put it in decimals. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in this equation, an equation in decimals. I'm not going to put the function just because I don't want to type all that. It's the same thing. I'm going to put the equation. The difference being equation is y equals only one variable, and a function is v as v of x, like 2 variables on where y is. Once I have that, I told you I don't want us to mess around with zooming in and zooming out here. The easiest way to do this is to make it a table, and then it'll plot those points. So what I'm going to do is hold down the enter key, go to the last number, hold down the enter key, and it will have a whole bunch of points. Then I'm going to come to the very bottom right here where it has a magnifying glass on the table and press zoom fit. And then it brings me right into focus for what I need to see, which is a summary of the graph. Then if I need to, I can zoom in and zoom out as I need. All right, so I'm ready to start. So I'm doing average rate of change. So we just read that it's average rate of change from 2 points. So basically it says that it's slope from 2 points. And that's the important thing that I need. So I'm going to need to make a note of that. So actually I'm going to make it on here. So average rate of change, and we're just going to draw like a little arrow here, is slope from, and I want you to say capital 2 points. All right, that's going to be very, very important, okay? It's the same thing as slope. It's looking at your slope, but you have to just use 2 points. All right, so now that I know that, I'm going to go to an equation. Notice I've made my equation a graph, so now this becomes like your question, right? The only difference is between an equation and a graph is putting it in decimals and making it a table so you can see the graph. All right, so now what is the average change between these 2 points? So it gives you 2 points. So because it gives you 2 points, you must use just those 2 points. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come put in a table. Okay, so I'm going to press plus. So you go ahead and put in a table as well. And then I just need 2 points. Now keep in mind they will always give you whatever those 2 points are. For me, my 2 points are 2 and 4. So I'm going to type in 2 and 4. Okay, for you, what are your 2 points? So here's your slope average rate of change. Here are your 2 points, 0 and 1. So in your table, you should have 0 and 1. Then you're going to go see what your y values are for when x is 0 and when x is 1. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm doing it for me, and then I'm going to check your understanding of yours. So what is the value when x is 2? So for me, 2 is 7,000. So I'm going to put 7,000. And 4 is 6,000. Now you might say, well, Miss Amy, I don't have a table in decimals like you do. And you're right, you don't. So what can you do? You can put in some values. So you can input some values of just what you're looking for. Can you see what 0 is on the graph? Can you see what 1 is on the graph? And then you have your 2 points. So you're doing the same thing even though you don't have the table lifted. I could have come here. In fact, let me do that. It's just that I have to zoom in. So I have to go to 2. In fact, let me teach you how to get your points. So for me, it's 2. What is 7,000? So here's 2. And I come up here and I can see it's 7,000. The other one is 4. So my x is 4. So I come to x is 4. I go straight up until I hit the graph, and I hit the graph at 6,000. So you don't have a table. You're visually looking at the graph. It's the same thing. All right, now that I have it, remember by definition, what did I just say? That I'm looking for slope from what? 2 points. I have my 2 points. Notice I'm not doing it from here. All right, so I'm going to click flag, and my slope is right before what? The x. So my slope is what? negative 500. So for you, click your flag and then look at whatever your slope is. All right, so for me, it is negative 500. I think you only had to do one question, but I have to do a few, so I'm just going to change my points. My next one is 1 and 6, so I'm going to come to 1 and 6. So I've just changed my points. Those are the 2 points they give me. So now I'm going to go see what 1 and 6 is. So 1 is 7,500, 6 is 5,000, so I'm going to put those in, 7,500 and 5,000. Hit flag again, and again my slope is also negative 500. That's interesting. So I'm going to write down negative 500. All right, then I'm going to check from 50 to 80. So now my 2 points are from 50 to 80. That's what I'm checking. Now, I'm not going to press enter until 50 and 80 because that doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to type it in at this point, 50 and 80. So my 2 points for 50 and 80 are negative 17,000, and negative 32,000. Okay, those are my 2 points. And what do you notice about my slope? So normally I did flag and then it comes up, but it's already up here. Negative 500 again. Okay, so that's an interesting point. Now I do want to make mention one thing about this. Technically, this does not make sense in the context of the problem because once my machine is worth nothing, right, I don't keep going past 0. So it's worth nothing. So I shouldn't be getting negative 32,000. That makes no sense. But I just want to show you a point that it doesn't matter what 2 points I pick on this graph, it's always going to be negative 500. And that's because for a linear equation, meaning a perfectly straight line, it has a constant rate of change. So it doesn't matter what points you pick, it's always going to be negative 500. Now that's just for this unit. But in our next units, they're not going to always be a perfectly straight line. So you still need to know how to find average rate of change. It's not necessarily your slope, but it's your slope from 2 points. However, average rate of change is the same thing as slope in linear because it has a constant rate of change. All right, so we're going to write that down. What do I notice about average rate of change? It's equal to slope. Okay, what does that mean in context? So it means that the machine loses 500, right, every single year, so per year. So it's going down by 500 every year. So as this is going down, this is going up. So what does it mean in context? My machine loses $500 each year. And yes, you're supposed to be copying this down as well as doing your question. So now I've finished my average rate of change. So let's go take a look at your average rate of change, which is right here. So go ahead and you should have your slope from 2 points, these 2 points, right there. And then now you're saying, what does that mean? So you're telling me yours looks like it's going up. So what's happening to the cost as your moles are getting mowed? So that's your meaning in context. Let's practice.